Black metal may be one of the few genres that allows vocals to take a back seat and not be the center of attention. But this doesn't mean that they aren't important though. In fact, screaming vocals laced with tons of reverbs and effects is synonymous with black metal as it helps give the genre its unique charm. Check out how Dave mixes two different vocalists and enjoy.
A lot of stuff going on here. Kind of just taking wide strokes, you know, like there's so many layers that it's almost too much to organize to a great degree. I have some of my ADD tracks that I lean on heavily, and I probably honestly like went through and organized a lot of this visually. If I see a part with multiple layers that are doing the same thing, I'm probably going to bring some of them down preemptively, honestly, without really listening a whole ton to some of these ADD tracks and able to give width. Later in the song, I'm going to adjust that and be a little bit more deliberate as far as like, okay, this is where the vocals need to get really big. It's either like a chanty type part that has some type of sing-along ability, which does exist even in music like this. Something that's repetitive and catchy, then I'm gonna want to make that a little bigger to highlight it than maybe other parts would be. I think the main example in this song would be, I forget what he says, dream, 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 something, something. But I think I can visually find it right here. There's the most layers there by far, and I have a lot down here on these lower 6 ADT track, which I've explained a million times, but I'll just quickly show you. It's taking a mono source and using a plugin called Waves ADT, which stands for Automatic Double Tracker, and it essentially takes that mono source and splits it up and sends the left side maybe back 20 milliseconds and the right side forward 20 milliseconds, sometimes less, usually not more, and also adds a bit of variability. So it's just kind of like this, it's not the exact same time offset. It takes a mono source and makes a somewhat believable stereo source. And if you blend that with another centered vocal that doesn't have this effect on it, it gives you this really cool wide effect. And I usually have 2 layers, a few ones labeled 60, which are panned out 60%, and then some labeled 100, which are panned out 100%. It gives me like multiple steps. And then you have a section like this with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I lost count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 vocal layers. You have plenty to work with. So being able to split some out on some tracks with some stereo widening, just going to make your entire performance bigger. And then the nice thing is you don't have to worry about as if you had 2 tracks and you were just going to pan them out manually, you'd have to make sure that you had 2 that lined up somewhat evenly, so you'd have a left and a right source, and nothing's going to be out of balance. Where if you're capturing that same stereo effect from a single take, you don't have to worry so much about having 2 of everything. That's a lot to do with the organization and some of like the stuff that maybe is a little bit more on the production side of things. And let's take a look at any of the processing that's on these tracks and how I treated them in the mix. So I'm sure these definitely came in uncompressed. I don't have my settings. I don't know if I kept a good log of how I compressed these in the mix, but what I would guess is it's probably at very least going through a distressor. And then if I had my V-comp at the time, it's probably the distressor into the Audioscape V-comp, which is like that common like 2-layer compression thing that's used commonly in all forms of music, but pop and stuff like that. And I like that vibe, hitting it into like that first compressor. In this case, the distressor is handling the heavy lifting, and then the slower V-comp, which is just a stay level style compressor, is doing more color work. It's going through like a shit ton of tubes. Then it also is doing some of that slower, more subtle character compression. I almost always am going to lean on either a distressor or 1176 for the main heavy lifting aspect. And I just know from experience that really like high-pitched, brighter vocalist like this guy will do better in the distressor, and darker vocalists will do better in the 1176 because they'll play into that. 1176A is like adds a lot of that crispiness, and it can be overbearing on someone who already has a lot of high frequency content in their voice. So that's probably what's on here. That's already been processed, and you guys got that too. So aside from that, on the individual tracks, it's just my slate stuff and then the ADD tracks. I may have done some de-essing at the processing stage, but I often won't for black metal because those S's sometimes catch the long and heavy reverbs that I'm going to inevitably have on these vocals and give it more character. They give it that like snaky feel where like the S sounds make it sound slithery and are going to grab a long reverb and trail off and poke out of a misty mix and give you some elements to latch on to. So I don't know in this case if I did or not, but I definitely won't as a default DS vocals in this style. Only if it's necessary, only if they're becoming obtrusive. So then on the vocal bus, we have the master bus, just a tiny bit of EQ. We can pretty much ignore that. I just needed to make a tweak at some point. And I have it split up into two subgroups for Kyle, which is Nas Alchemist, the main songwriter, and then the guest vocalist who kind of sprinkles in some stuff, whose name is Jessica. So there's K vocals and J vocals. We'll start with Kyle's because his are the main tracks. So the first thing you notice is like huge amounts of reverb and delay that are on all the time. Like this isn't even like an automated up section. This is like the baseline amount of reverberation and delay on pretty much all the vocals. So extremely heavy. A lot of this vocal verb, a lot of this extremely long, huge verb that's, a 5-second reverb, and a pretty high level of just quarter note stereo delay that's on almost all the time. There might be a few spots where I turn this off or trim it down, but as my default sound, it's like very heavily affected. Lots of ambiance. And again, we're using that to like place these back and make you have to listen a little bit harder to hear behind the cacophonous, like surrounding, enveloping vocal effects that are swirling around your head and just kind of making it a little more terrifying in general. So for now, let's turn these off so we can hear a little bit more what these processors are doing. But it doesn't look like that's a whole ton. I've got some slight amount of saturation, which the HG2, really cool saturator, helps lend some thickness to certain voices. Like his vocals are very much like throat focused. They can be kind of thin. I mean, there's a lot of layering here, and he definitely does some lower styles as well, but it's something that I found useful on raspier black metal guys is to use some amounts of saturation. Often I'll go for an HG2. Sometimes FabFilter Saturn 1 or 2 is useful, but some type of saturation can be helpful to just like add some thickness and unifying factor. And in this case, I'm just using it on the bus. Occasionally, I will also find something that fits and drag it across each individual track. But in this case, it's working fine on the bus. Turn these off and bring them on one by one. So probably not a huge amount that it's doing here, but let's see. Am I adding more reverb somewhere else? Yeah, I'm actually adding more delay on this send as well. So we'll bypass that, although it's not going to because it's automated, but it's fine. We can listen through a tiny bit of reverb. These would sound honestly probably a little silly if they were too dry. Anyway, let's bypass it again. Let's turn it on, see if we can identify what's going on. Pretty subtle. And then our main EQ. So nothing too insane. High pass, low pass as we normally would. It looks like I do have a slight bit of a dynamic node here that's helping control probably some of the initial like, yeah part. There's a lot of those where like the upper mids can become a little bit too explosive. So I would guess that it's grabbing that to a minor degree and controlling it and then allow it to come up for the parts as his like dial eases down. But yeah, let's turn this guy on. So I know for a fact that he's using an SM7, which is great, again, for these like more throat-based styles because of the nature and like the proximity effect that it lends. It's controllable. It adds thickness, a lot of thickness to vocals that can be thin through other mics. Like I would never put a vocalist like this into probably any kind of a condenser microphone. It would just catch too much of the throat crispiness, like in a bad way, and not enough of the body. So using what it's traditionally a darker microphone like the SM7 can lend a lot of weight to a vocalist that is primarily using their throat. And then this Pro MB thing, which I really like, I showed a variation of this, I think, on the cephalic session. It does a combination of controlling low mids, which helps with areas that are very heavily layered. Also, all of these sections can control like some of the layered elements. And then this top expansion part adds a little bit of spice back to some of the consonants. You obviously need vocals in metal to be heavily compressed to give them power throughout, like so they can compete with like really loud drums and guitars and stuff like that. But once you compress them so hard, sometimes they can lose some of the explosiveness. You know, you can manage that somewhat by using slower attacks on your compressors, so it saves some of those consonant sounds and can save some of that explosiveness. But the top band of this multi-band compressor really accentuates that in a cool way and adds some of that back like as a finishing touch. So it's used pretty moderately here. It's only a little over a decibel, but when I turn this on and off, you'll hear it controlling the low and low mids, and then also adding a little bit of an explosive element to the higher frequency areas of his vocals and the beginnings of words and the consonant sounds, and can make them sound a little more lively. And then we put our effects ends back on, and obviously things get a lot more scary and awesome. Very cool. Another classic element of black metal production is mixing vocals kind of quiet. If you listen to a lot of early black metal, it's like the vocals are very much bedded in the music. And it's another one of those things that is almost off-putting at first, but then if you can get past that and you keep listening to the music, it's like the fact that it's a little bit low like invites you in. It's almost like it's like inviting you to kind of like lean in to hear it, and all of a sudden like the music's captured you, you know. So I wanted to try and find that limit. I didn't want to go as far as I have in the past with some of these black metal productions where the vocals are really low. I'm trying to still make him a highlighted part of the production, but at least have parts. So we're accomplishing a similar effect by masking it so much with all the reverbs and delays. So the vocals are still loud, but they're like cloudy, you know. I keep on using these words, but it's really just the best way to describe this like black metal mist, the cloudiness that I want to purposefully add to the production to draw you in. And then there's an element of like the overall level too. These definitely aren't at like pop song vocal levels, and that's not because it wouldn't sound good that way, but it's it wouldn't quite make you work as hard to like pull you into the music. So deliberate aspects of masking using multiple tools, volume, effects, ambiance, all that kind of stuff. It's like finding the balance is key. You can definitely go too far with all this stuff, but you want an element of black metal fog. So let's take a look at the Jessica vocals, which I think are even more affected. Hers are pretty nuts. It's like it's almost like a person that's lost their mind, you know. It has that like vibe to it of like witch that's like been possessed, or a banshee that is feral or something like that. I don't know Jessica, so I'm not trying to call her a feral banshee, but but it has that vibe. So it's one of those, a lot of her parts are, if you put them in the right spot, they're incredible. And if they're too loud, in my opinion, they can start to sound silly. Like these by themselves, you know, like it sounds a little silly. Like I can't be the only one that thinks that's like a tiny bit silly on its own. But there's definitely a way you can place them where it sounds like terrifying. So if I show you, we have a similar set of EQs here. I have a Soothe because her tracks were not quite as clean. I don't know what signal path she's using, but I'm still using some saturation. I still have an EQ set up that's a little more basic, but doing the same general thing, you know, just balancing out the source. But if we open up the track and look at the sends, it's like I'm just kind of like throwing everything at it here. So there's probably more effects coming off these vocals than there are, you know, source material. So let's listen to this one part as it sounds with all of the effects. And if we hear it in place, you'll probably just hear a hint of like that vocal breakup and that insanity, and it just adds this like wild, untethered character. That's actually really sick sounding. So I kind of had to, I maybe like picked and choosed a little bit more. There's some sections where I just completely muted these two. Kyle and I may have done some of that together. I may have done some of that on my own. Just like, okay, it's either not fitting or it's not lining up. Actually, this isn't even muted. It's just bounced up here because I applied some overall effects to this. So that's most of the tonal stuff. I'm trying to think if she has any highlighted sections in this song. There are a few parts on the album where she was like the main vocalist rather than the accompanying vocalist. But I think her role in this song is mostly accompanying. Maybe here. Looks like this part's pretty loud. Yeah, that's pushed pretty hard. Let's hear how that sounds.